Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second in our web on the impact of COVID-19 on researchers. Today's talk is When the Field is Online. I'm Silvana Di Gregorio, Research Director of QSR International, and today's speaker is Janet Salmons, who is a free-range scholar, writer, coach, methods guru, and lead writer for Sage MethodSpace. And she has been doing and writing about online research for a very long time. We want you to get the most out of this webinar, both during and afterwards. We'll be taking questions at the end of Janet's presentation. So if any question comes to mind during her talk, please type it into the question area and go to webinar. And I will put the questions to Janet at the end. We also want you to continue the conversation after the webinar, and you can do that in Twitter using the hashtag NVivoChat. And that way you can chat with each other and swap ideas and resources that you may have. So without any further ado, I'm going to switch the presenter so that Janet is, I'm just going to make Janet a presenter. Just hang on a minute. Janet, if you can show your screen.
How about that?
Yes, you can see your screen.
Okay. Hello, everyone. And also like to give a shout out to the people who may be watching this recording. So our topic here today, when the field is online. I'll be talking about some options that hopefully might be helpful. In introducing myself, I just wanted to say that I became interested in online research kind of growing out of my engagement as an early adopter in e-learning and working with doctoral students online and looking for ways to use technology, as not only a teaching and learning tool, but also as a research tool. And with the books that are shown on your screen here are available in the Sage Research Methods database, which means you can download them chapter by chapter as PDFs. And if that database is not in your academic library, there is a free trial you can use to access those. And the handout explains this and also points to particular chapters that align with the comments I'm talking about here today. So, we are all here because we know there's a profound changes going on that involve, not only higher education and research, but all the kinds of topics that we might want to study. And, your lovely research plan may be something that's going to need to drastically change. And you just may not be able to carry out the proposal you've made, or perhaps you're already engaged in research and you can no longer carry out that study because you don't have access to the site or the participants or either other limitations. And I do understand the profound and disturbing impact that may have. And, believe me, I wish that I had, a magic wand to, make it all better. But I do hope that this presentation will be helpful, and I will be making follow-up posts on methodspace.com to respond to questions we don't get to here today. So my goals here are to help you think through the potential for moving studies you're planning or engaged in to a different approach that will use information communications technology. And that's the term that I use to encompass a wide range of digital tools and online interactions, abbreviated ICTs. Then I hope that you can think about how you can defend your choices if you need to revise your proposal or design to carry it out in a different way. I hope that you can, find ways that you can rationalize that so that that will smooth the path for getting that approved. So I want to step back because I think that research design is a holistic process, and any change to any area of the study is going to have an impact on some other part of your design or approach. So, as we start to think about especially moving something that you're planning to conduct face-to-face to an online environment, there are questions in every single area of the design that you'll need to consider. And of course, we don't have time to address all of those today. So these are the ones that I want to focus on. So when you think about conducting qualitative research online, we have many choices, and they range from options that involve no direct contact with participants to options that involve in-depth interaction and collaboration with co-researchers. Today, I'm going to focus on the elicited type so that we can look at ways that we might pose questions to participants. And the technology tools, rather than focus on particular platforms or brand names, I like to discuss the features, because I think once you decide what features work best for your study and your participants, then you can find the tool that will meet your need. So I've categorized them as text-based, which would be communication primarily in writing, video conferencing, the type of place we're in right now, social media or online communities, or games and immersive environments. Today, I'm going to focus on the video conferencing and text styles of communication. But to begin with, I think it's important to think through how and why you would use technology, because the answers to that question will influence not only what tool you'll use, but who the participants might be. So in the first example, what I'm calling using it as a medium, here we are choosing to communicate online because we aren't able to communicate face-to-face. So the medium itself doesn't really matter that much. Whatever will work for the participants. So we might even use different tools with different participants. With the second, we choose a technology particularly because it has some features we want to use. Say, for example, if we want to be able to see the participants, then we're going to choose a visual medium like video conferencing. Or if we want to interact with people, in a particular way, we'll choose a tool that will allow us to do that. But that will also mean that maybe there are some potential participants who are excluded because they aren't able to use that particular kind of setting or interact in that type of setting. Then the third, the technology is the subject we're studying. So, we're interested in how people use the technology and how they, what kinds of posts do they make? With what frequency? What kinds of materials are they posting? So this just goes into a little bit more detail about, what that choice might mean. So as we're thinking about those tools, another factor is the timing. Do we want to, have a situation where the participants are responding immediately, or where we have a time lapse between? And I should say, with all of these choices, there's no right or wrong. It's a matter of finding the one that best suits the study and will meet your needs. So, understanding those will help you to make the best decision. So, we used to kind of think in a dichotomy between synchronous synchronous and asynchronous. Either you're online at the same time or you aren't. But I suggest that it's more complex than that. So drawing on rich media theory and in speaking with a number of online researchers about situations have emerged in their study, I think it's important to distinguish between synchronicity and synchronous, and to be clear with our participants about what it is we expect. So the difference here being that in a synchronous exchange, where yes, we're online at the same time, but perhaps you're listening to this webinar and you're also checking your email or taking care of your kids or doing any number of things, whereas in a synchronicity degree of communication, this is what we're doing, and it's the only thing we're doing, and we're really focused on that. Then down the spectrum, near synchronous describes a situation where I think of it as an elongated conversation. So this, think like, say, text chatting or being in a social media setting where the other person or the other people are not necessarily on at the same moment, but you know they're going to respond pretty quickly. That's just the nature of that style of interaction. Whereas with asynchronous, we have a time lapse between the message and the response. So this would be more like email. Another factor is how we're going to relate to participants online and what kind of role we're taking with them, how we build a relationship and work with them to elicit the kinds of responses that we want. So Stephen Cavale, who wrote excellent books about interview research, introduced two metaphors for the miner and the traveler. So the miner is where you've got the data, I'm going to dig for it and dig it out. And the traveler being where the researcher is journeying with the participant to elicit the kinds of data they're hoping to collect. But I suggest that we add another one, which I call the gardener, because I think that when we're interacting with people online, we need to allow for the time to cultivate trust and rapport and to build a relationship. So again, it may not be a completely either or. Maybe that you have a combination of these styles, but to think about how you see yourself in relation to the participants and how you set up your study in terms of the timing for different parts of the study. So let's just, for a moment, look at what's happening in a face-to-face interview. And all of these options are possible online, but each one is a conscious choice, not only about all the things I've been discussing, the technology tools, the timing factor, but also, who the participants will be and how you clarify your expectations with them. So, in a face-to-face interview, we have the chance to look the other person in the eye, shall we say, to gauge their responses. There are all kinds of nonverbal signals and gestures. The way the person responds, the emotion they might have, how much time it takes them to think about their answers. All of those are, in the category of nonverbal communication. When we're setting up a face-to-face interview, we choose a setting. It may be that we're out in the community, out in the participant's home or in their social environment somewhere. Back when we used to be able to go out in public and be with people, we might make those choices, or perhaps the participants come to our office or a neutral location. There are all sorts of options we might have to choose a setting. And then, in addition to talking, we also have the ability to share, to look at things. Then perhaps they have some items that they want to show you some artifacts, photographs, documents, or other kinds of things. So, as you think about, what you were planning, if you're planning face-to-face interviews or face-to-face participant observations, focus groups, other, styles of research of that kind, what of these aspects do you want to retain when you are moving to an online space? So let's look at two options. One is the video conference, the other is the text-based. So in a video conference, on one hand, this is probably, the closest to a face-to-face interview. We can do a multimedia interview that is synchronous. We can achieve synchronicity because, let's face it, if we can see the person, we know they're not doing something else at the same time. So, we have the ability to include verbal interaction. We can look at things on a shared screen. We can use a shared whiteboard. There are lots of tools we can use in an interview of this kind. We could do photo or graphic or media elicitation. There are all sorts of interactive ways we can communicate. But we could also use video conferencing technologies in other ways if that type of interview wasn't your choice. We could even use a recorded video conference where we discuss the points that we want our participants to respond to, or perhaps show situations we want their feedback on, and then combine that with written questions in a discussion forum or in email. So some of the things that we want to think about if we're choosing a video conference tool as an option, one would be whether your participants have access to, do they have webcams or not? If we want, we might use a video conference without a webcam if they don't, but is that something that is a requirement, or is that something that is optional? Are they willing to participate in that kind of an interview? If you're studying sensitive issues, does the participant have a safe space where they can be, in private to participate in the interview? Because one of the sort of characteristics of video conference is that if we can see the person on the webcam, we can't necessarily see whether there's someone else in the room, or some other factor that might influence their ability to speak candidly. Then, thinking back to some of my earlier slides, what kind of data do you want to collect? Do you want to collect visual data? Is that a part of what you want to achieve by choosing this type of technology, or not? Are you just using it, where really you're going to transcribe the audio into text and analyze that, or are you going to use the images that make arise as well? And if so, those are all things that will need to be a part of your consent agreement, which, alas, we don't have time to go into in this. That would be a whole nother webinar. But some of the things to think about in terms of using this option. Another approach is text-based. So here again, we have a range across this continuum. We could use a text chat approach, which many people, it's easy to do on a phone. So if someone has a phone, even if they don't have a computer with a webcam and all of those tools, they might still have a phone that allows them to use text chat, or a discussion forum. What I'm calling here a discussion forum is a place where you can post questions and a person can post answers. Of course, if we're doing research, we want that to be somewhere that is in private, because protection of the data is important. And one point I meant to make on the video conference that I wanted, that is true for both of these, is about where the data will, where is the data going? With video conferencing, and if you're evaluating various tools, look for ones that allow you to make a local recording to your own computer rather than saving it in the cloud, because that way you can actually verify that you can protect the data. And similarly, if you're thinking about doing a text chat style of interaction with participants, look for a tool that allows you to save that data to your own hard drive, and rather than it going into the archives of that platform that you cannot verify that you have the ability to protect. So we can, here actually an example from the cases in an online interview research was one that clued me into the importance, if you're doing text chat interviews, to make it clear to your participants that, I want for this period of time, whatever the length you're going to set, I would ask that you would please, turn off your other communication features and just talk with me, if that's important to you. For example, if you want to know whether the person is, this is a hard question for someone, they need time to think about, then for that to be a realistic signal to you about what's going on for the participant, you need to know that they are actually thinking about your question, not chatting with 2 or 3 other friends at the same time, and that's why they didn't get back to your question. On the other end of the spectrum, in terms of the discussion forum and email, there's quite a bit of literature out there about research using email in particular, and to some extent discussion forums. And some find email to be quite a valuable online interview approach, because it gives the participants time to reflect on the question and to really think it through. It also gives you a chance to build your relationship, over a series of exchanges. And again, from my work with doctoral students, I've seen people use this and successfully. And it may seem almost old-fashioned to some of the newer forms of communication online. Some think email is a thing of the past, but it is an approach that you can use. So the one suggestion that I would make, if you're thinking about doing a text chat real-time interaction style of written interview, that you look at your questions and break them down into tiny little questions, because no matter how patient you might be and how enthusiastic your participant might be, let's face it, someone's not going to sit there and write for a half an hour to answer your very large question. You want to keep the exchange going. If you're aiming for that synchronicity, then you want it going back and forth pretty quickly, so that you keep your person on the line. Because one of the factors of online interviews in any technology is that it's very easy for the participant to say, okay, I've had enough of this, and just click the little X in the corner and away they go, and there's nothing you can do. They don't have the potential embarrassment of getting up and leaving as they might in a face-to-face interview. And of course, with research ethics, a participant certainly has the right to discontinue an interview at any time, but if we want to keep the person engaged, then really look at your questions, and perhaps do a trial run with a friend or a colleague, and see whether the questions you are posing in writing are viable to work in this way. And then have those questions written out so that you can simply cut and paste them into the text chat so that your participant doesn't need to wait for you to write the questions. Now, of course, you might have additional follow-up prompts that you are going to write out in real time, but if the bulk of the interview is already planned in that way, that will keep things moving. So I think, perhaps you can see that in both of these, there's, these choices will also kind of factor into the degree of structure in your interview. And I talk quite a bit about those decisions in the book, and I suggest if you can access the book that you take a look at that, because if we're in the real-time online dialogue, I suggest that we need to think at least in a probably semi-structured situation, and allow some flexible questions and open-ended questions as well, but that we need to have things somewhat planned in advance, and that's particularly true if we're doing it in writing in real time. So just to summarize some of the key points here, I think this is a circle, so I'm not going to so it's not a linear process. You're going to maybe kind of bounce back and forth between these questions as you try to think through on the approach that's going to work to carry out the studies that you have in mind. This kind of top one, have the questions or the problems changed? I think this is probably the most difficult, and I haven't touched on this today because might change your entire study and who you are engaging as participants, because perhaps the questions you are asking, simply the social changes that we've observed even as casual observers mean that what we plan to study is no longer relevant. I hope that is not your situation, but acknowledge that it could be. But if you're in a situation where simply you need to refine what you're planning to do and think about how you might use one of these online methods to carry it out, then these other questions will be ones that you can jump into. So the questions about how you would relate to participants in an online setting, the answers to that might influence the choice you will make for the kind of setting that would be most suitable for the study. The methods that you want to use, whether you are able to use these kinds of elicitation methods with your participants, or perhaps you find that at this point you need to shift and focus on using extant data that might be more readily available, or perhaps you've already conducted some interviews and you say, well, I'm going to use the data from the interviews I've already collected, and then I'm going to add in some additional material that I can collect from extant data. So there are a number of choices in that category, or it may be that people you're planning to interview face-to-face will be that they've made the transition to doing everything online because we're all staying at home, and that will be just fine. In which case, then you're thinking about what technology tools to use and whether your participants are comfortable with those tools. Do you need to maybe do a trial run? Say to the participants, hey, can we log in and just connect for 10 minutes to make sure that everything is working, and give them some pointers about using that tool and the ways you want them to use it in the interview or the focus group or whatever. Those are things to think about. Or whether you find that using the tool that you would prefer will exclude too many potential participants, and you need to think again. And then there are the ethical issues to reconsider, and at the heart of it, what kind of data do you want to collect? So, as we've seen here today, technology is not foolproof, and it's always a good idea to have a plan B. So if you're, thinking about using technology to interact with participants, taking the time to think through these decisions and align them with the purpose of your study will be productive in the long run. So we'd like to take a little time for questions, and I encourage you to type your questions into the chat area. If we're not able to get to them, I am going to respond in writing to as many as I can on MethodSpace. This is something that we're committed to in this time. So I hope that you'll visit us there, and we'll continue and hopefully be able to find resources that will help you through this difficult time.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Janet. And we do have a lot of questions, Janet. So the first one relates to the metaphors you mentioned. And first of all, I'd like to know, where did the traveler or miner metaphor come from?
There's the writer named, it's K-V-A-L-E, Cavale. He's written a number of books about interview research methods, and those metaphors were ones he introduced. And so I, certainly not rejecting those metaphors, but simply adding to them with the gardener metaphor to, kind of point to that, a little bit different than the journeying with, because you might need to do some cultivation before you can journey with the person, because let's face it, especially in this era where there's a lot of distrust about fake news and whether things we read online are bots or whatever, we need to make sure that the participants know that yes, I'm a real person on the other side of this screen, and you can trust me. I'm a reputable researcher. I have this connection to a university or whatever your, kind of association might be, and, take the time to build. So, when as I show with the circle of this framework, all of these things kind of fit together, because if I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, well, I want to take some time for cultivation, and maybe I'm going to do that through an email exchange, and then I'm going to schedule a synchronous interview in a video conferencing space where I can both, kind of dig with some deep questions, as well as to kind of, go along with the story that the participant wants to tell me. So, as you're thinking through, how you're going to design your study, I think, to me, online research is inherently multimodal, because, we're probably going to need to use more than one type of communication throughout the entire process.
Right. And I think Katrina also added about, on the same topic, about the amount of time needed to allocate it, whether you're a gardener or a traveler or a miner. And obviously, I think you've answered, the gardener takes more time to cultivate. And yeah, she wonders how practically that impacts.
If you're someone who, let's say you're someone who you have already an approved study, you've already, you're underway with your plans, and now COVID happens and you've suddenly got to change your path. You may have already recruited participants, who you now are going to, they already have agreed to participate in your study, or perhaps an organization has agreed to make their members, available to you for interviews or observations or whatever, then, it might simply be a matter of, writing to those people and saying, hey, we're not able to meet face to face, but, I would like to meet with you in Skype or Zoom or, whatever your choice might be, or to just pose to them, what type of technology tool are you most comfortable with? How can we proceed? And, and then, already, through, if you've already got consenting participants, you've already done some of that initial cultivation. Whereas if you're someone who is at the very beginning, where you are, having to recruit participants and begin from scratch, then I think, allocating a little bit of time for, some exchange, whether it's email or text chat, or even posting, let's say, for example, I, back when I was supervising doctoral students, I had people who found groups that were, so let's say, one researcher was studying flex time in the work life. And so she found online communities in LinkedIn that were discussing that, got permission from those moderators to communicate with people within that that space, and then would make arrangements, for people that were willing to have a private interview to meet, outside of that discussion forum. But, if you were doing something like that, where you were, perhaps you have a social media page or a blog or something, an online place where you are putting out information to either potential or consenting participants about your study, those would be places where you could carry out this type of communication. And I think particularly at this time, I mean, people certainly understand, they're having to make these changes in everything from, their kids' lives to their own lives. So, I think, they understand.
Yes, right. Right, okay. Remo has a question about, which programs are safe in terms of privacy and data protection, and that mentions that Zoom is actually forbidden in Europe. I'm not sure if it's forbidden, but I think there might be some issues with it.
Well, what I would look for are a couple of things. I mean, with Zoom, and I've been reading some of the issues around that particular platform, and part of it is that people who never did this sort of thing before and suddenly are thrust into it don't know how to use the settings that are there. So they just open things in a way that kind of I wouldn't say invites, but makes it possible for hackers and others to get in. But a couple of things that I would look for, one is, can you create an interaction, where you're going to set up your meeting with the participant in a way that has password protection, so the only person that can get in is the person that's got that password. So that's one thing you can do. The other that, as I mentioned before, is looking, and Zoom has this capability for local recording. So a lot of the issues that people have had with Zoom in particular is around recordings. They make recordings that then, unbeknownst to them, are accessible online to anybody who knows how to look for them. But if you've recorded it to your own hard drive, well, nobody can get to that, unless they've hacked your total computer, which, that would be, another degree. So, I used to use Adobe Connect, which I had through my university, which is more of an enterprise type of product. So if you don't have that through your university. It's something that you're not, it's hard to buy as an individual, but that also had the ability to, you could record it to your local hard drive, or you could record it and then delete it from the archives from the platform. And to me, that's one of the most important factors. So in other words, there's, what is the security while the event is going on, that bystanders or onlookers can't be observing your interaction, and the other is what happens to the recording after the event. So, those are the things that I would look for in the platform that you're considering. And the same goes with the text-based. If you're using a text client, is that is that interaction being saved on that company's server? Like, say, for example, Facebook Messenger. I would not use that. I mean, they're not reliable in this regard, and many researchers have discussed that. This is just not. You might use that to set a time, or to make some preliminary communications, but when you are going to do the actual interview, you don't want to be in a space where you are unable to verify that this data is not being saved on the platform server. And so that, those are characteristics that I would investigate.
Right. Okay. Thank you. We have quite a lot of questions here, and I'm letting us go over time because I realized that we had a lot of technical problems. So I have one more here. Is from Malcolm, who said that he used NVivo in his analysis of prisoner interviews, and he found it very helpful, but now he needs to conduct more interviews. However, he can't now go into the prison, and prisons are very concerned over use of technology for interviewing prisoners. Also, prisoners are a protected group, and I don't know if you have any advice on what he can do.
Well, I guess, what I would say would be, I mean, if the prison where, he has been working, where he has some relationship, where they allowed access before, I would ask them, what form of communication will you allow? I mean, it may be that it needs to be a old-fashioned paper written interview where, perhaps, going to some variation of a diary method where you follow up, if they're follow up with the participants he's already interviewed, then, some kind of basis for the interaction has already been established, and seems like that would be simpler. But finding new participants, I could see that might be quite difficult. And so finding perhaps someone who still has access. Is there a social worker? Is there a chaplain? Someone else who who still has access to that prison, who might help collaborate and either deliver some written questions for some either questionnaire or a diary kind of approach. The only other thing that I would suggest would be to say, if what the data you've collected is not enough, is there some extant data that might be used to supplement what the data that you've already collected. So that might be another option to consider.
Right. Okay. Right. There are just really so many questions that we won't have time to go through them all. But
well, I'll just say to everyone that I asked for the questions to be sent to me, and I will do my best to respond on MethodSpace. I've set up an area in MethodSpace for your burning questions. So you could go to MethodSpace and post them there, or I'll respond to the ones that are forwarded to me, and then I'll also signal these discussions on. My Twitter is @eInterview. If you're a Twitter person, you can go there. And I realize that this is, it's a very large topic, and the people are, really in some difficult situations. But I'll try to follow up with as many of the questions as I can.
Right. Okay. So thank you, Janet. And just to remind you that on Twitter, you can also ask questions. You can, so the hashtag is NVivo chat. And so you can connect and help each other out. And some of you might have other resources to help one another. So, because that's open now, you can start using hashtag NVivo chat on Twitter. And just to let you know that we have some upcoming webinars, and we're on April 15th. For those of you who have to teach and suddenly have to shift over to teaching online, Christina Silver and Sarah Bullock from University of Surrey and Shireen Snelson from Boise State University will be talking about ways to convert your face-to-face teaching to teaching online. And also, we have just had a third in this series of, doing research at the time of COVID-19. And so we have Professor Christine Hine, Professor of Sociology at the University of Surrey, and she'll be talking about ethnographic field work across online spaces. So that's a new one we've just had, and that should be up on the website soon. And here are a few more that we're doing. Just to let you know that we have an NVivo community where you can learn about events such as these, and also some upcoming podcasts that we're doing and other resources. And it's also a way for you to connect with researchers across disciplines and organizations. And I should say that Stacy Penna, our NVivo community organizer, has done a great job setting this up. We already have quite a good community of practice. So you can see here is the website address if you want to join the NVivo community. So that's go.nvivobyqsr.com/community. So please do that. And of course, for those of you who aren't that familiar with NVivo, we actually support the whole process from data collection to transcription to analysis to tools to collaborate. So we have a new collaboration tool, as well as a new integration with Word and Excel that's upcoming. And also we have a lot of support in terms of online training, and we also have a certification program. So I'd like to thank Janet for speaking with us today. I'd like to thank you all for persevering through all the technology issues that we had. And good luck, all of you, with the fieldwork. I mean, we do have 2 polls. And just quickly, we just want to know, do you plan to conduct qualitative research online? Just to see if you've got that, just to answer yes and no. And yes, 90% said yes, 89% yes, 10%. So it's between about 89–90% are planning to conduct qualitative research online. And and then there's the second, so I'll just close that. And then the second is what methods would you use in online data collection? So we're just running that to answer that. Right, so we're saying, majority are saying one-to-one interviews, 78% interviews, 52% group or focus group, 41% documents, diaries, or narratives. It's very interesting. There's also some participant observation and covert observation as well. So I'll just let that run. Okay, so I just want to, again, thank you all for taking part, and good luck with your research. And thank you, Janet.